Thank you. I knew I should have shown up for the walkthrough. Lieutenant Governor Smith, Mr. Speaker, majority and minority leaders, and members of the Minnesota House of Representatives, Madam President, the majority and minority leaders, and members of the Minnesota Senate, Madam Chief Justice, and the distinguished members of the Minnesota Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals, my fellow constitutional officers, members of my cabinet and staff, other guests, including my son Eric, my grandson Hugo. Stand up, please, Hugo, sir, may I see you. Say hi. Hugo's grandmother, Elida Messenger, and my other special friends, and my fellow Minnesotans. Last year I gave this address from the University of Minnesota because our state capitol was undergoing its major renovation. I said then I look forward to speaking this year in our new capitol, and here we are. It's a superb restoration and will serve Minnesota well now and for generations to come. So I want to again pay tribute to the legislators and other state officials who for the past 3 years endured serious work disruptions in order to benefit their fellow Minnesotans for the next century. I want to thank the contractors and subcontractors and their thousands of workers who contributed their skills to this masterpiece. And I want to thank all of you, the people of Minnesota, who supported this endeavor and can now enjoy its priceless result. I invite all Minnesotans to visit your state capitol this year and revel in its restored beauty. You'll see a brightness and a creativity and a clarity which is not shown for decades. If you have them, please bring your children and grandchildren and share with them your pride in Minnesota. I am very proud of our state. I was born in Minneapolis 70 years ago this Thursday. I grew up here and have lived here. I love Minnesota. I love the forests, the farmlands, the waters, the big cities, and the small towns. I love the different seasons, each with its own distinctive features. Most of all, I love the winters, because that's when, as a boy, I could pursue my passion for playing ice hockey. There were few indoor arenas in Minnesota back then, so we depended upon cold fall and winter weather to skate on frozen lakes and ponds. If I could skate on the pond near my house by Thanksgiving, that was my definition of a good winter. Now, as I approach the end of my career in public service, with 2 years remaining in this, my final term as governor, I'm especially grateful for all of the remarkable people I have met in Minnesota. The teachers who dedicate their lives to helping struggling children, the heroic law enforcement officers who courageously risk their lives to protect our lives, the hardworking public employees who serve the rest of us well and seldom get credit for doing so, the talented businessmen and women who drive our economy and provide us with jobs, the skilled workers who make those jobs work for a better Minnesota, the amazing farmers, doctors, nurses, firefighters, and so many others who make ours the best state in the nation. I thank you all. In 2010, I campaigned for governor on the promise of a better Minnesota. Now, and 2.5 years from now, I expect to be judged by you, the people of Minnesota, on how well I have kept that promise. In my first inaugural address, I said that my top priority was to bring more jobs to our state. When I took office in 2011, there were 202,000 Minnesotans unemployed. Since then, our growing businesses have added 255,400 jobs. Our state's unemployment rate has been at or below 4% for the past 30 months. And there are more jobs in Minnesota now than ever before. Nevertheless, these past 6 years have been very difficult for many of our citizens. The Great Recession has had severe and lasting effects. The New World economy doesn't look like the old one, and it doesn't treat many Minnesotans as well. Inflation-adjusted real household income in Minnesota averages $68,730 today, which is 22% above the national average. However, it is 8% less than it was at the turn of the century. To repeat, the average Minnesota family is relatively poorer than 16 years ago. The U.S. economy, which from 1970 until 2007 grew at an average annual rate of 3.1%, real GDP, is now recovering from the Great Recession at a much slower pace. Real GDP is now projected to grow by only 2% annually for the foreseeable future. A slow growth economy with declining real incomes foreshadows a very uncertain future for many Minnesotans and other Americans. Compounding those uncertainties are the ever-widening gaps between people who have too little and those who have so much. From 2007 to 2015, the average real incomes of the richest 20% of Minnesotans increased. The average real incomes for everyone else fell. And the incomes of the wealthiest 5% increased the most of anyone. That drop in share of income affects the bedrock of our society, the middle class. It's not just that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, our middle class is getting poorer too. For many of Minnesota's hardworking men and women, their lives are more difficult and uncertain than before the previous recession, or for Minnesota's farmers and miners, the current recession. Many have to work longer hours for less money, and many others who have good-paying jobs worry that they might lose them. Health insurance premiums cost more and often cover less. Retirement incomes are more inadequate and less reliable. Too many Minnesotans no longer believe that their own futures will be better and that their children will live even better lives. We cannot escape entirely the ups and downs of the U.S. economy. However, in the past, we have often suffered lesser downturns during national recessions and achieved faster recoveries when conditions improve. If our country is going to be mired in an era of slower economic growth, our public investments must be even more targeted to ensure that our state's economic performance remains superior to most other states. Thus, we should look closely at every budget expenditure and policy decision and ask ourselves two questions. What will they do to help hardworking Minnesotans now? And how will they help our children and grandchildren in the years ahead? The answer to those two questions should shape our priorities in this legislative session. Our first priority is for the foundation of a successful future must be to ensure our state governments continue fiscal integrity and budget security, which I promised to restore when I became governor back in 2011. Back then, state government faced a projected $6 billion deficit in the next biennium, with still more deficits predicted thereafter. In my first inaugural address, I promised that I would, quote, clean up the state's financial mess. I've kept my word. We've turned that first $6 billion projected deficit into $1.4 billion projected surpluses for each of the next two bienniums. To get there, we first had to repay that $2.8 billion owed our school districts, then repay for previous raids on the airport fund, the Doug Johnson Fund, and the solid waste landfill fund. We eliminated other shifts and gimmicks, and we set aside parts of our most recent surpluses to establish a $2 billion budgeted reserve fund that will help protect our state's finances from future economic downturns. As one result, the Fitch rating agency recently increased our bond rating to AAA. The budget I will propose tomorrow will continue our state's fiscal prudence, with surpluses at the end of both the fiscal 18-19 biennium and the following fiscal year 2021 biennium. I am determined that when I leave office in 2 years, Minnesota's finances will be in sound condition and ready to support an even brighter future. But our fiscal stability will be imperiled if, as some suggest, we, quote, give it all back in tax cuts. A feast of tax giveaways to a handful of wealthy individuals, corporations, and special interests is not Minnesota's path to continued economic growth. It might surprise some Minnesotans to learn that our state's personal income tax rates have remained exactly the same for the past 16 years, except when a fourth tier, which affects only the wealthiest 2%, was added in 2013. If anyone among the other 98% of Minnesotans is paying higher state income taxes, it is because your income has increased, not because the state has raised your taxes. Similarly, no one has raised the state sales tax since 2008, except on tobacco. Nevertheless, some politicians will still try to lead Minnesotans into believing that I've raised their taxes. They also claim that more tax cuts are the keys to our future economic growth. In 1999 and again in 2000, Minnesota's elected leaders tried just that. Governor Ventura and legislators twice lowered the state's personal income tax rates to where they remain today. Yet cutting Minnesota's income taxes did not noticeably boost the state's economy, either before the Great Recession or during it. In fact, our state's personal income and job losses were worse than the nation's. What those lower tax rates did do, however, was to drive the state budget into severe and lasting deficits, which required difficult measures and almost a decade to resolve. No, low taxes have never been Minnesota's path to prosperity. Instead, it is the public investments that we have made with those tax revenues, especially in the educations of our citizens and the quality of our transportation and other infrastructure, that have been and will continue to be the keys to our citizens' better standards of living. As such, they should be our top priorities for putting those budget surpluses to work for Minnesotans. When I ask businessmen and women why they are locating or expanding here, their number one reason is almost always the quality, reliability, and productivity of our people. Minnesotans inherently know and practice the virtues of honest, hard work. But to enable all Minnesotans to achieve their full potentials, we must provide them with the best possible educations, skills, and training that they will need to live successful lives and contribute to the successes of their communities. Those excellent educations, from early childhood to K-12 elementary and secondary, to colleges and universities, are increasingly the prerequisites for better jobs, higher incomes, and healthier lifestyles. If we were ever to lose our educational superiority, the damage to our state's social and economic well-being would be irreparable. That is why a top priority during my first 6 years as governor has been to restore state funding for our elementary and secondary schools, our public colleges, universities, and technical schools, to provide free all-day kindergarten to our 5-year-olds, and now to increase support for quality child care and pre-kindergarten classes. Thank you. Now, if you're against free all-day kindergarten, don't stand up. Those investments are our best strategies for choosing achievement gaps and for raising the skill levels of all of our students. Earlier this month, the well-respected national education publication, Education Week, graded the 50 states' public school systems in 3 areas: K-12 achievement, school finance, and early childhood education effectiveness. Minnesota ranked 11th best state overall. We were 6th best for K-12 achievement, 3rd best with an A rating for our early childhood initiatives, but only 21st in per pupil education funding with a grade of D. From 2003 to 2012, real estate aid for public school operations was cut by $1,741 per pupil, or 16.2%. Total school district operating revenue fell by 7.8%, as property tax increases were not sufficient to replace the loss of state aid. Working together, we have increased real estate aid by $968 per pupil from 2012 to 2017. But in real dollars, it will still be 7.2% less than it was in 2003. It has fallen upon Minnesota's property tax payers to try to make up the difference. When I took office in 2011, I promised to increase Minnesota's investments in E-12 education every year I was governor, with no excuses, no exceptions. With your support, we have kept that promise, and I'm not going to abandon it now. So tomorrow I will propose 2% increases in the per pupil aid formula for each year of the next biennium. They are expensive, costing $371 million. Some people will say we can't afford to make those investments. I say we can't afford not to. Frankly, I wish we could afford to do more. The demands on our public schools from our ever more diverse populations continue to grow. As I said earlier, our schools' abilities to meet those growing needs and to provide every student from every background with what he or she needs to become a successful adult are crucial to their individual successes and to our state's better future. Already, growing businesses throughout Minnesota are experiencing shortages of people to fulfill their available jobs, especially in more highly skilled areas, making our continued investments in education and workforce training even more important. A recent Minnesota Public Radio story highlighted one business's predicament, which has become common all over our state. Mike Rowley founded and runs GoRoute, a 3-year-old technology company in Rochester. Mike couldn't be with us tonight, but Lauren Scott, the company's senior director, has joined us. Lauren, thank you for being here. Mike and Lauren say they're ready to increase sales dramatically this year, but they need more trained staff to do so. And finding them in Rochester is proving difficult. If they can't find the skilled workers they need, they worry that their financial backers will pressure them to move their business elsewhere. If GoRoute can grow successfully in Rochester, however, it will benefit not only the company and its employees, but also the entire city. One investor said Rochester needs only 1 or 2 success stories like GoRoute to make the city a magnet for innovators that it wants to be. Adding those businesses to the Destination Medical Center, being led so well by the board's chair, Lieutenant Governor Tina Smith, will multiply the benefits to our entire state. Thus, increased investments in the University of Minnesota and Minnesota State are crucial to meeting businesses' future workforce needs. It surprises some to learn that state funding for higher education for Minnesota State, the University of Minnesota, and the state grant and loan programs has fallen significantly during previous decades. From fiscal years 2000 to 2013, real estate support for higher education dropped by 48%. In 2012, state funding for higher education had dropped to its lowest level in real dollars since 1981. Those declines come as no surprise, however, to the outstanding leaders of our 2 state college and university systems, University of Minnesota President Eric Kaler and Minnesota State Chancellor Stephen Rosenstone, who are here with us tonight. I salute you both for your strong leadership during difficult times. I especially want to thank Chancellor Rosenstone, who is retiring this summer, for your dedicated service to our state. I'm glad to report that from fiscal years 13 to 15, state funding for higher education increased by 20%. However, it only began to make up for the support lost previously. Those reductions caused student tuitions to increase severely at our state colleges and universities. In real dollars, tuitions more than doubled across all state public post-secondary sectors from fiscal year 2000 to fiscal year 2012. In nominal dollars, average tuitions more than tripled. It's wrong that so many of our students are graduating with degrees in one hand and with mountains of student loan debt on their backs. It jeopardizes their futures and our state's future. We can and we must do better, and my budget tomorrow will propose that we do so. In addition to increasing general fund support for our public colleges, universities, and student aid programs, it is also critical that we increase the capital investments needed to repair and expand existing buildings and to build new world-class facilities. Many of those projects are included in my proposed bonding bill, but frankly, even that is not enough. Minnesota State and University of Minnesota campuses are falling farther and farther behind in their needed physical plant improvements. They cannot provide first-rate educations in third-rate buildings and classrooms. And those obsolete facilities will not attract either the number or the caliber of students needed for those institutions to be successful, and thus for Minnesota to remain successful. And if we invest in them now, however, our colleges and universities will produce the entrepreneurs, the ideas, the workers, and the products to drive business and job growth throughout Minnesota for decades to come. And that should be our goal. But we cannot expect our schools to be successful or our economy to flourish if we fail our kids before they even enter classrooms. That is why the most essential component of a successful education strategy and our highest priority must be to improve early learning opportunities for all of Minnesota's youngest children. The best way to close the achievement gap is to stop it before it begins. The good news is we've already made great progress already, but those gains aren't yet enough. When I ran for office, I promised to expand state-funded kindergarten to serve all of Minnesota's 5-year-olds. Today, because of legislative support in 2013, over 55,000 children are attending all-day kindergarten in Minnesota, and we have tremendous results to show for it. But the research says that to be most effective, we need to start even earlier to improve young children's lives. The legislature deserves credit for increasing state support for quality child care and supportive family services during the past 6 years. Last year, you provided the first state funding for pre-kindergarten school programs, which was immediately oversubscribed by eager school districts and now benefits 3,300 Minnesota 4-year-olds. Combined with 26,700 early learning scholarships, more Minnesota children are getting the better starts they need for today, for their better tomorrows. However, too many of our children are still being left behind because we haven't done enough to ensure that all of them have excellent early learning opportunities. Take, for instance, the Marshall Public School District. Led by Superintendent Scott Munson, who is here with us tonight. Scott, thank you for coming. Marshall applied for pre-K funding. A grant would have helped 52 of their youngest learners. Unfortunately, because of the state program's inadequate funding, Marshall was one of 160 school districts that could not be supported this year. Nevertheless, Marshall, like many school districts, is moving ahead anyway. With limited funding but great determination, they've enrolled 125 students in their Little Cubs program for 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. Thanks to state funding for other early childhood programs, including scholarships, Marshall has been able to keep costs down for families enrolling in preschool. Thank you, Superintendent Monson, and thank you to your tremendous pre-kindergarten team who have joined us here tonight, Jill Schwartz and Darcy Love. Your work makes an enormous difference in the lives and educations of your students. Minnesota is better for your exceptional efforts, and again, I thank you. But we must do more to support our young children all over our state. That is why on my budget I will propose further increases in state funding for quality childcare, for pre-kindergarten, and for other early childhood enhancements, such as visiting nurses for teen parents. They will all help to ensure that every child starting kindergarten has a decent chance to become a successful student and to become a healthy, productive adult. But don't take my word for it. To hear Janice and Mylan Armstrong talk about the gains their 4-year-old daughter, Janice, made since beginning voluntary pre-K is to understand what early education means for Minnesota families. Before their daughter, Jana, began pre-K, her parents took turns staying home to care for her. But her limited interactions with other children were starting to affect her physical skills, vocabulary, and emotional development. Janice and Mylan believed that Jana would benefit from high-quality childcare, but they couldn't afford the cost. However, since Jana began attending free pre-K 5 days a week, she has blossomed. Her vocabulary has increased tremendously, her motor skills are improving, and she has made great friends at school. She will be ready to start kindergarten this fall. Having Janet in school has also given more freedom to her parents. Janice has returned to school part-time and is applying to nursing programs in the fall. Thank you, Janice and Mylan, who unfortunately could not be here tonight, but thank you for sharing Jana's success with all of us. The Armstrong story illustrates what voluntary pre-K can do to help young children and their families throughout our state. Why wouldn't we want to provide those better opportunities for everyone? In addition to our moral responsibility to ensure that every child receives a world-class education, there's another important reason to make these additional investments, because our future depends upon them. The complexion of Minnesota today is very different from the state I grew up in. Back then, diversity training was teaching the Germans to get along with the Scandinavians, or the Norwegians with the Swedes. Now Minnesota looks more like the world. Between 2000 and 2015, our state's white population grew by 3%, adding about 109,000 people. During the same period, all populations of color in our state increased by 79%, adding about 461,000 people. And to our benefit, Minnesota will become even more racially and ethnically diverse in the years ahead. Some people want Minnesotans who are different from them to, quote, go away. In Minnesota today, children, teenagers, and adults are arriving at school or work to find words of racial hatred, religious bigotry, or other smears written on their walls, lockers, and bathroom stalls. This ugliness has no place in our schools, our workplaces, or our communities, and each of us has a responsibility to stand up and snuff it out. Thank you. The students I met recently at Maple Grove High School have shown me, and all of us, the courage it will take to make Minnesota a better place for everyone. When racist words were scrawled on the bathroom walls in their high school, some students organized a walkout and have since continued their efforts to create a safer, more tolerant school for all their fellow students. As a speaker at last week's Martin Luther King Jr.'s celebration, Maple Grove student Morgan Ames said, quote, We cannot be complacent. We cannot wish away our problems. We must be bold, steadfast, and have the courage of conviction to peacefully confront racism against any and everyone, irrespective of race, caste, and religion. Morgan is here with us tonight. She's joined by her friends Chance Laurie and Moses Kambe. Morgan, Chance, Moses, you are our state's future, and our future is brighter because of your courage. Again, I thank you. Last year during this address, I said that Minnesota state government needed to lead by example and increase the diversity in state employment to 20% when I leave office to more fully reflect the diversity among our citizens. In 2011, 8% of state employees were women and men of color. Today it is 11%. Similarly, I have committed state government to increasing the percentage of employees with disabilities to 7% by August 2018. Now we're at 6.2%, and I'm confident we will reach or even surpass that important goal. These efforts have provided employment opportunities for more Minnesotans of all backgrounds and abilities. They've helped to create a more inclusive and representative state government. There's more we need to do, but we are working hard at it. Thank you. Along with education, the other most important investments we can make to create better futures for Minnesota are in transportation and other infrastructure improvements. I have spoken about the need to improve our state's highways, roads, bridges, and public transit systems during every one of my previous State of the State addresses. I said the situation is urgent. One legislator partly agreed with me last year. He said the problem was, quote, urgent, but not that urgent. Well, I think our transportation deficiencies are that urgent. Roads, highways, and public transit systems are to our state's economy like arteries are to the human body. If the arteries are healthy and efficiently transport blood, oxygen, and nutrients throughout the body, everything works at its best. If, however, the arteries become decrepit or clogged, the body's performance suffers. Minnesota is at a critical juncture with its transportation systems. Our investments are inadequate to maintain even their current conditions, much less to expand them and serve our growing population. Further deterioration will severely constrict our future economic growth and our social vitality. Legislators from both parties have repeatedly said that they agree that we must fix our aging infrastructure. In press conferences, speeches, and campaign literature, they have made those promises. Unfortunately, those works have not been transformed into actions, despite the mighty efforts of the Senate DFLers last year. MnDOT has documented a $6 billion gap over the next decade between expected revenues and what we will need to maintain our existing highways, roads, and bridges, as well as to make much-needed improvements and expansions. Every year we delay in filling that gap, everything deteriorates further and becomes even more expensive to remedy. My transportation funding proposal would not only generate that $6 billion of additional revenues for state highway projects, it would also provide counties, cities, and townships with an additional $2.8 billion over the next decade for their road and bridge improvements. Now, I'm willing to cooperate with legislators to find a solution that most of us can accept, but it has to be a real solution. We must provide enough additional resources dedicated to transportation to make the improvements urgently needed over the next decade. If we do, Minnesotans will gain the benefits of better highways, roads, and bridges, fewer potholes, shorter commute times to work and school, and a more competitive Minnesota economy. So I challenge all of us here tonight to find and agree upon such a solution. Anything less will shortchange our citizens and our state's future. A similarly critical need exists for increased investments to improve public transit in this and other metropolitan areas of our state. An estimated 800,000 more people are expected to live in this metropolitan area in 25 years. Imagine the traffic jams if they are all forced into cars on existing metro streets and highways. There's not enough funding now to support even the current level of bus services, and is completely inadequate to build the new rapid transit, primarily bus routes, needed throughout the entire metropolitan area. Doing these projects is costly. However, it would be far more costly not to do them. This region's public transit network already lags behind most other major metropolitan areas in its capacity and its efficiency. We fall farther behind at our peril. In addition to providing travel options for people who cannot afford to own cars, studies show that talented millennials prefer to use public transit, and that its availability is a key consideration in their deciding where they want to live. And finally, every commuter who rides a bus or a light rail train to and from work is one less car on our already crowded highways. So even people who don't use public transit benefit from its success. There are other major infrastructure improvements which are essential for our state's future economic growth. I've called for 2017 to be a year in which we all pay special attention to the quality of our state's water, which most of us assume we can take for granted. Unfortunately, the facts say otherwise. Many of our state's lakes, rivers, streams, and ditches have water that is unsafe for drinking, washing, commercial uses, and recreation. And those problems are getting worse. What does it say about the land of sky blue waters when families can't swim safely in nearby lakes? What does it say when local rivers and streams are so polluted that fish and other wildlife cannot live in and around them? This Friday, I will host the second State Water Summit in Morris to develop more ideas for solving those serious problems. However, I've already proposed important clean water initiatives. 2 years ago, the legislature passed my buffer proposal to better protect public waters from polluting runoffs. My tax bill includes important funding to help local counties and watershed districts implement the law, and also tax relief for farmers who convert land to protect Minnesota waters. My bonding bill contains new funding to help smaller communities in greater Minnesota better afford the water treatment systems they need to make their water safe for their citizens to drink and use. These improvements are not only essential for our citizens' health, but they are also needed to assure our state's future economic growth, particularly in greater Minnesota. Take, for example, the city of Detroit Lakes, which I visited during my travels across Minnesota last summer. In a crowded City Hall chamber, civic leaders told me about their need for a new water treatment plant. Everyone agreed that the old plant can no longer provide enough clean water for the city's uses. They also agreed that a new plant would be too expensive for their residents and businesses. It is expected that it would cost $36 million, which would be about $4,000 for every man, woman, and child in Detroit Lakes. However, not making the upgrade has serious negative consequences. Randy Peterson, the owner of Maltworks in North Dakota, was recently looking to locate his business to Detroit Lakes. Maltworks depends upon a reliable, affordable source of water, but the high cost of water water treatment in Detroit Lakes made that move almost impossible. Fortunately, after much persuasion from city officials, Randy moved Maltworks to Detroit Lakes, and he now wants to move his home there as well to take full advantage of Minnesota's better quality of life and talented workforce. Thank you, Randy, for your faith in Minnesota here tonight. Thank you. Thank you. And welcome to Minnesota. But that success story was almost lost because the aging infrastructure in greater Minnesota is struggling to meet the needs of 21st century businesses. My bonding bill proposes to invest $167 million in clean water improvements throughout greater Minnesota. I ask the legislature to support this effort because many smaller communities cannot afford the cost by themselves. One area where the former president, the Congress, and I have fallen short is to provide all Minnesotans with more affordable health care. The Affordable Care Act has had some very important successes. During the last 3 years, over 250,000 Minnesotans have gained health care coverage. Nearly 96% now have health insurance, making us one of the most successful states in the nation. There are important features of the Affordable Care Act which must be preserved. They include requiring health insurers to offer coverage to people with pre-existing medical conditions. The Kaiser Family Foundation estimates that over 1/4 of American adults, including 744,000 Minnesotans, have pre-existing health conditions that would disqualify them from coverage under the insurance industry's former practices. We must also protect the Medicaid expansion and Minnesota Care that have provided lifelines for 300,000 Minnesotans, as well as many rural hospitals and clinics. And parents should remain able to cover their children under their policies until they reach the age of 26. It is also essential to protect the quality of coverage Minnesotans have gained under the Affordable Care Act. Obamacare now requires that insurance plans must include 10 essential health benefits: outpatient care, hospitalization, maternity, pediatric care, mental health and substance abuse treatments, emergency, preventative, laboratory, and rehabilitative services, and prescription drugs. Now, some people object that they must buy higher cost coverage that they don't need, like maternity coverage for us 70-year-old males. However, those minimum requirements assure all Minnesotans of more complete health coverage from the health insurance products. Previously, over 1/2 of the personal bankruptcies in this country were caused by people's uninsured health care costs. Most often, the people involved had health insurance, but they found out too late, after an illness or injury had afflicted them or a family member, that the treatments their doctors prescribed were not covered by their insurance. Those are some of the successes of the Affordable Care Act. Another is the dramatic improvement of MNsure, as evidenced by its performance during the current open enrollment period. More than 106,000 Minnesotans have enrolled in MNsure coverage for 2017. Over 60% of them will receive federal tax credits, which will lower their health insurance costs by an estimated $350 million this year. Wait times for MNsure's telephone assistance have averaged 2.5 minutes during this busy open enrollment period. MNsure has more work to do, but it's significantly improved. On the other hand, far too many Minnesotans who don't qualify for federal tax credits have been hit with rapidly rising health insurance costs, from drastic increases in their premiums to extremely high deductibles. Too many others have discovered that, contrary to the promise of the Affordable Care Act, they cannot keep their current doctors under any available new plan. Those failures of the ACA are having devastating effects on the lives of many Minnesotans. Last week I heard from Sherry Sexton about the huge premium increases that she and her husband Vince are facing this year. Sherry and Vince run the Irish Ridge Dairy in Millville, which has been in their family since 1859. They've always purchased their own health insurance. Last year, the Sextons paid $1,580 a month for their insurance coverage. This year, their premiums will cost them $2,200 a month. That adds up to $26,400 for a policy with a $13,000 deductible. But despite that awful cost,
Get him to the ground. Get him to the ground, please.
Recognize Senator Gazelka.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the joint convention do now adjourn.
Senator Gazelka moves that the joint convention do now adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails, and I declare the joint convention adjourned. The House will come to order. I recognize Representative Pepin.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Pepin moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails, and the House stands adjourned until 3:30 p.m. on Thursday, January 26th, 2017.